Hey, everybody that's watching live and also the recording. I am here with one of my classmates, my college classmates from West Point, Joe Beard. Very successful entrepreneur, investor, venture capitalist, living out of the Dallas, Texas area. We're going to jump into his story, some of his successes and failures, and some leadership lessons, maybe how emotional intelligence has played into his journey, how it's impacted his success. And some success tips, business tips, financial tips, that kind of thing that he's willing to share with us. And before we jump into that, I want to just share briefly kind of some of the folks that we've been able to interview so far as part of the 360 Movement Personal Growth Tribe and also EQ for Entrepreneurs podcast that we just launched literally last month. So far, our very first one of this quarter was a guy named Zach Thomas. He's also West Point grad, Army Ranger, author, and also a Chick-fil-A owner-operator. That was our very first interview. Also interviewed another West Point grad, Jocelyn Lewis, who is a active duty company commander right now. Amazing story that she's got. One of my other good buddies from West Point, Colonel Rose Lopez, a full-bird colonel, West Point grad battalion commander with the National Security Agency, the NSA, currently a military intelligence brigade commander. Another lady named Karen Sidley, she's a university professor, the president of the American Baptist Association, which is an organization of over 1 million members. And she is the president, African-American lady, single, crushing it. Again, a 1 million person organization. So she's got an amazing story as well. Then just recently, a couple weeks ago, a guy named Scott Criswell, he participated in the Mogadishu conflict as an Army infantry officer, and currently a CEO. 12 years ago, started a company that was literally zero, didn't exist. 12 years later, today is a top 4 global international brand in the hand hygiene space, multi-million-dollar organization, 500 employees. Did an interview with him last week. So, and now again, super excited to interview my classmate Joe, and again, hear his story, his experience. And hopefully all of us can learn some lessons. And if you guys could, please, as we're going along, I'd love to hear whether you're watching this on the podcast, on the EQ for Entrepreneurs podcast, or YouTube, wherever you're watching this at, consuming this content at. I'd love to hear your comments in the threads below on whatever platform it is, on what takeaways you're getting from Joe, from his mindset to his lessons learned, that kind of thing. Engage in the content so that you can get the most out of it as well. Okay. Joe, without further ado, man, tell me your story.
It's been a journey, man. I mean, from our days, I grew up an Army brat, right? I don't know if you knew that, but so my dad was Special Forces for 20 years, Sergeant Major. And so that's the household I grew up in. And so I'm sure that's part of what led me to West Point and, wanting to join the military. Which you were actually there for. So that's where my story began. But, professionally, I've done a little bit of everything. I'm a jack of all trades. So spent time in the military, got out in 2001. And after leaving the military, I went to work at Applied Materials in Silicon Valley. That's kind of where I really, kind of cut my teeth in terms of learning about business and sales and, dealing with customers and all that good stuff. Left there to go to business school. So funny story, John Hampton and Thad Underwood, I'm sure you remember those two names, two of our classmates. John Hampton called me and was like, hey, you need to leave Silicon Valley and go to business school. And I was like, no, I'm good. My wife's good, kids good. And so I only applied to Columbia Business School and ended up going with my 2 best friends from West Point. So Thad was actually in my class. John Hampton was there. I did 2 years at Columbia, went straight into investment banking, which didn't really know what I was getting into, but, enjoyed it, learned a lot about finance, worked on Wall Street, did M&A, and ended up leaving New York after being in New York for about 4 years. My wife was born and raised in Hawaii, and so she was like, look, staying in the city isn't a long-term play. We got to figure something else out. So I moved to Dallas. My parents were here. My sister was here. I did investment banking here for probably about 8 years. So I rode Bear Stearns down to the bottom, worked at Merrill Lynch, Worked at a couple of other boutique shops before starting in venture at Perot, which is where I've been for the last 5 years now, running the venture capital firm for Ross Perot Jr. and Anurag Jain. So it's been a wild ride.
Joe, that's incredible, man. Wow. There's so many of your transitions and pieces of the story that I want to do a deep dive in, because you're talking about it like you're changing your socks. For me, it's like, holy cow, that is huge. So let's back up a little bit. So what branch did you branch, first of all, and then how did you make that decision? Like, okay, I'm going to jump into, make this transition into, because that transition is scary for a lot of military folks, going from our comfort zone, 4 years in the military school, and then another 5 years in the military environment. So 9 years, and then making that transition into a completely unknown, a whole different world, literally a whole different world. How did you make that transition mentally, emotionally? How did you do that?
So I branched air defense, and my first assignment was Hawaii, right? So I did 3 years and some change in Hawaii, and then I did command at Bliss. So while I was in command, I started looking at opportunities, and unfortunately, it's one of those things where it's kind of a perfect storm. I was originally supposed to go to Fort Bragg and Ranger School when I got to Fort Bliss, and they took my orders, reassigned me to Fort Bliss, because there was a brigade commander there, a West Pointer, that was like, hey, I want you to command in my brigade. So that was the first thing that kind of threw me off, right? So I wasn't excited about that. I was born at Fort Bragg, so going to Fort Bragg was kind of going home for me. So I did my command time. I'd gotten married, had my first kid, and unfortunately, I just saw a situation where, you're in the military, you're doing great, you love what you're doing, you see some good officers, you see some okay officers, everybody seems to be progressing at that time at the same rate. I was thinking about my family, and so that's when I really started thinking about doing something outside of the military. But I will tell you, it was a scary thing for me. And I distinctly remember sitting down with my wife with a piece of paper and writing out the pros and cons, sitting at the dinner table about getting out of the military. And it was a scary time. I mean, I got fortunate that I ended up working for a former Army captain that was ROTC from Notre Dame. And he just got me, right? He got my background, how I thought, where I came from, everything that I learned at West Point and in the military. And so he just really took me under his wing and showed me the ropes. So I actually made a great transition out of the military. And I know it doesn't work like that for a lot of people, because I've seen people, transition and not be in a good situation where they're, doing night shift and they're overqualified to be doing what they're doing. But I landed in a great spot, was really, really fortunate.
So it sounds like, with a lot of folks, it really sounds like there have been some really strategic relationships that have been key in making some of those transitions during scary times.
Yeah, without a doubt. Every single transition I've made, man, I've been blessed the way things have worked out, but I have been very methodical about the moves that I've made in my career. And I will tell you that it's always, one of the keys to my success is always just having really good mentors and people around me to kind of nudge me in the right direction at the right time. So I try to do that for other people now, because I've been so fortunate to have it as I've navigated my career.
Love that concept. And we could spend the rest of the time just on that topic alone. Are you intentional about pursuing mentors or mentorship? And if so, how do you determine, okay, man, let me reach out to this person because I'm seeing something here that I'm lacking, whatever. What is your mentorship decision-making process?
I have been very intentional about it. And I'll tell you that I've kind of grown up in environments where there haven't been a lot of people that look like me, right? So in investment banking, there wasn't a lot of people that looked like me. Venture capital, there's not a lot of people that look like me. And so, I've always had to be very thoughtful about relationships and mentorship and figuring out what I can learn from people. And I think that's been a key to my success. And I'd say that I've been intentional, but I'm sure that I've been lucky as well, right? In the sense that, people have taken an interest in me and my career and wanting to help me out. But one thing I will say about this, and it's advice I give to everybody when I talk to about mentorship, it's like a lot of people see mentorship as this one-way relationship, right? Where you go to somebody and they just give you everything. And you and I both know that's not how mentorship works, right? It has to be a give and take. And so, people want to see that you're bringing something to the relationship. They want to see that you're following up and getting things done and proactively, making moves for yourself. And now they're just there to help guide this person that's, they're like, damn, how can I not help this guy or gal? Because they're really trying to make moves. So I think it has to be a two-way street. And I've just been really fortunate, man.
That's excellent point. Excellent point. I love that. I love that. It is, the mentorship relationships that I have gotten the most out of have been those where I have been intentional at asking myself, let's say you were one of my mentors. One of the questions that I ask myself regularly with those folks that I connect with intentionally for mentorship is, how can I add more value to Joe's life?
Yeah.
Because Joe is feeding into me. He's sowing into me all his wisdom and experience and whatever the topic is. I don't want to be just a taker. I want to, how can I add value to Joe's life? And maybe in a way that he doesn't have somebody in his life that has one of my gifts, as an example. So that's great. So on the gifts or strengths side, Joe, what do you feel are your strengths or your superpowers? What do you bring to the table? What makes you unique and special?
I would say from the very beginning, understanding how to really interact and get to know people on a personal level, I think is something I've always been really, really good at. And, just understanding people's motivations and, the things they're passionate about, the things they care about, the things that are important to them. I think whether you're in a leadership role or whether it's a peer, understanding that about people and how they tick, it just helps you to interact with them in a way that they're going to receive things the right way, right? So if I understand everything about you, it's so much easier for me to deliver information, whether that's something good, whether that's something bad, whether that's something that's going to change your life. So I think that's always been a really good strength of mine. The other thing I'd say is work ethic, man. Like, I've always grown up, like I said, in a military family. And my dad was always like, when I was young, he'd push me and say, look, you got to be smarter, faster, tougher than everybody in your class, right? And so I've always grown up with that mentality of, I'm going to grind it out. Like, I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to be too tired. I'm not going to make excuses. I'm going to figure out a way to make it happen. And so I think those two things are kind of me at my core, and they both serve me unbelievably well.
On that first one, because I feel like that is something that everyone can get better at. So for that to be one of your strengths and superpowers, have you always had that skill, or how did you develop that ability or that intention or that even that understanding that, man, for me to be more successful or to have more contribution, I really need to be more intentional at understanding who it is that I'm connecting with. I think that's such a critical skill that a lot of people don't pay a whole lot of attention to.
Part of it is, I'll tell you, and some of the folks that are listening may understand this, is that, when you're one of few, like growing up as an African American, where a lot of times for me in my life, whether it's been school, college, work environment, there's never been a lot of people that look like me. And so I've always had this thought of fitting in, right? Like fitting into the culture and understanding the culture. And so, whether it's a plus or a minus, I've always felt like I needed to get somewhere and then understand it, right? So I've always been an active listener, right? So I actively listen and understand. So before being the person that's opening their mouth in every meeting and speaking up and, putting myself out in front and center, I'm always kind of understanding the dynamic. Where's the power? Where's the influence? Where are the people that talk too much? Where are the intelligent people? So I've always wanted to assess the landscape and understand where I fit in. And then part of that is understanding those people around you and those motivations, right? So I think it's something that I've always kind of grown up with. But I will tell you, in my role now in venture capital, you have to be an active listener, and you have to understand people, because every entrepreneur that comes in and pitches me on a business opportunity has different motivations and different needs and different long-term goals. And they may have a family they're supporting, they may not, they may have gone through a lot of trials and tribulations just to get into our office. So just understanding and hearing people's story is kind of part of my job.
And I always find that just fascinating how sometimes people's strengths or superpowers take them to a position, like, again, that is such a great point as a venture capitalist. Like, what a great spot for your strengths to be on display, on use, because like you said, you're a Shark Tank, right? You are the sharks. Yeah. And so you have to really pay attention to some of those nuances. So that's a great, let's jump on that for a second, Joe. What do you look for if I'm an entrepreneur and I want to, come and look for funding, venture capital, that kind of thing? What would you be looking for in me or a presentation from me?
There's so much there. It's a lot to unpack, but I'll start with the entrepreneur, right? So as you can imagine, we want somebody who's passionate and smart and driven, who has the intellectual horsepower to get done what they say they're going to get done. We look for all the values that we care about, integrity, compassion, all those kinds of things. So we're really assessing the person, because it's a long-term partnership, right? Like, anytime we invest in a company, we're looking at a 4 to 7 year relationship probably. And so making sure that we are partnering with people that have the values and that are driven to get the things done they say they're going to get done is super important. So I would say that, we like to say that we bet on the jockey and not the horse. We really focus on the entrepreneur. So assuming all of that's great and we feel like we're backing someone that we can back, the business has to be something that is going to be industry transforming, right? And venture capital, you're making bets very early in the hopes of building something that's going to be very powerful and industry transforming. And so we don't look to invest in small ideas. So we want a big idea solving a big problem. We only invest in B2B opportunities. So that's obviously part of our criteria. And then the last thing, which is, pretty unique, because I think a lot of investors will just invest in a great guy or gal with a great idea. For us, because we are, an early fund, we've only been around our firm for only been around for 4 or 5 years. We only invest in opportunities that we can add value to. And I think that really speaks to our approach in terms of being a partner, in a sense that we want to roll up our sleeves and help you to build a powerful industry changing company. And that's making a commitment on our side. And so we got to make sure that we can actually add value and deliver, right? We don't want to under deliver on the things that we want to bring to the business.
That's awesome. And I've heard that before too, from other VCs, that it's, and I love that analogy that you said, it's as much the jockey or more as it is the horse. So it's both and, but it's not. Some entrepreneurs think, well, my widget is the greatest widget on the planet. My idea is the greatest idea. Okay, but are you the right person to bring that widget to bear?
Yeah. And you know why? It's because a lot of times, people are going to bring you an idea that seems great, and they're going to get down the path, and something's going to happen in the market, like what we're seeing today, right? What we're seeing right now in the current environment, which forces you to change your business model. So now the business is different than what we originally invested in. But if we really just back the entrepreneur and we feel like we back the right person, we feel like the odds of that person finding the right business is going to be there.
That's right. One of the things I love saying about an entrepreneur is inherently, to be, in my opinion, to be a successful entrepreneur, and as a 20-year entrepreneur myself, 20 plus entrepreneur, you have to be a solution seeker. You have to be a problem solver.
Yeah.
Just by definition, right? That's what's different between an employee and an entrepreneur. Is an employee, hey Joe, you're my boss. Hey boss, how do I figure this out? As an entrepreneur, I'm looking in the mirror. So, you have to be a solution seeker by definition. So, okay, so this is another question I want to ask you. So, because this is inherent in an entrepreneur as well, how have you developed your mental and emotional agility and resilience as an entrepreneur?
I've had to, right? Because I tell people all the time, number one, being an entrepreneur is a lonely place. It can be an unbelievably lonely place, whether it might be isolation from your friends, isolation from your spouse. It's lonely out there when you're making decisions and having to make moves on your own. And so I think for me, it's a lot of it came from the military, right? In the sense that you remember back in the day where young lieutenants and half the people in your unit are older than you. You're not married, or you may have been freshly married. They all have kids. They've all been in the military for years, yet you're the leader, right? And so being able to manage your own emotions and your own way of interacting and being able to control yourself is so critical to being able to interact with other people in a way that's going to be effective. And I will tell you, like right now, as a VC, I mean, a lot of times I'm dealing with my CEOs, and it may not be on a sales issue or a business issue. It's usually on some kind of emotional, they're fired up about something, and it's talking them off the ledge and saying, hey, let's think about this before we make it's just being someone that's in the foxhole with them and helping them to see something that they may not see, because we're not in the fight, right? I'm not in the fight with them every day. So I can be a valued partner and advisor that comes in and says, hey, before we go fire Susie, let's think about what Susie's doing and what was our role in her underperforming. And, maybe there's an opportunity to fix it before we start, making hasty decisions.
There are so many things that you have shared so far, just in a little bit that we've been talking about emotional intelligence and how emotional intelligence plays into being a successful entrepreneur. That being said, I've also met a lot of entrepreneurs that are not very emotionally intelligent, but clearly you are. I mean, just hearing how you're processing the different decisions that you're making and how you're even talking about it tells me you're very emotionally intelligent. Has that been an intentional journey for you, to grow your emotional intelligence, or has that been part of that, from your military journey, even from your upbringing with an SF dad and your military upbringing, is that all part of that?
It is something that I've been intentional about, just because I've found that, the people that I've seen and the people that I've looked up to in the business world, I have found to be strong in that area, right? So I'll give you an example. Joe DePinto, the CEO of 7-Eleven, who's a '86 West Point grad. One of the things that I've taken from him over the years is that he's all about putting the right people on the bus. And he knows that if you get the right person and put him in the right role with the right responsibilities, it's magic. But you could take somebody unbelievably talented and put them in the wrong role, and it can be a disaster. And so that's something that, so that goes back to just understanding people, right? And their drive. And that all starts with yourself at the end of the day, because if you can't control you, it's damn hard to interact with anybody else, right? And right now in my role at Perot Jane, I have 44 companies that we're invested in. So that's 44 different founders and, management teams that we interact with. And so you're constantly moving between teams and between issues. And so being able to just have the maturity to step back and be thoughtful about what are people asking me for? What do they need? You know, maybe there's something that they need versus another CEO needs something totally different from me. So it's just, you know, it's just a matter of being mindful and thoughtful and, you know, respectful and trying to help people solve challenges. I mean, that's my job.
Are some of the trends for you to have a portfolio of 44 companies? What are some, and obviously there are going to be some unique stuff, but what are the trends? What are some in all, you know, in all 44 companies, I see these three things, you know, as an example. What would be some of those that maybe you would see?
You know, in terms of challenges, the first thing that stands out to me, organizational leadership is always a challenge. Always. Even for people that are building their third company, there's people that are strong at it. It's just hard, right? It's hard. It's really hard. So in our portfolio, you have a lot of very smart, talented people that have been engineers, that have been software developers, that may not have managed a lot of people in their careers. And so when you build a fast growing company and you go from 2 people to a couple hundred people in 2 years, that's a lot to manage, right? You think about it. I mean, we were at West Point for 4 years learning about leadership before we got our first platoon, right? Some of these CEOs, they're jumping right into the fire where they've really never had to manage anybody. And so that's not easy. So building a layered, you know, where you have middle management and, you know, younger employees, when you have senior people joining that are peers, like it's a lot to manage. The second thing that I would point out is enterprise sales, right, is also a very big challenge. And so we have people in our portfolio that are really good at it and figure it out, but they still got to work hard, right? You can have a brilliant idea, great, you know, service or product, but being able to get through the noise and finding the right people at the right time to pitch your idea, to be able to deliver on it, to be able to price it right, to be able to manage that account. Like there's a lot that goes into that for an early stage company. So I would say without a doubt, those are the 2 biggest challenges that I see, no matter whether the company's successful or whether it's struggling, those 2 things are a challenge.
So you know, you're interacting obviously with the senior, the C-level folks and stuff. How teachable do you find senior leaders are?
Well, that's something that we look for, right? I mean, when we invest early on, one of those traits that we look for are people that are coachable and that can take guidance, right? Because again, it's going to be a relationship, and there's a lot of times as an investor where you have to have tough conversations where, you know, I do actually interact with people outside of the founders, right? I do want to interact with the sales team and with the marketing team and with the engineers and really understand kind of how people are feeling, because culture is a big deal, right? People being excited about coming to work and understanding the mission, like that's a big deal. But I think it's a really big thing. And I will tell you, across our portfolio, I would say that most of our CEOs and founders are coachable and they're open to advice. And I think a part of that is, you know, us establishing it as a partnership, not as an investment, but as a partnership, right? We want to see them be successful. If they don't win, we don't win, right? I mean, so we're aligned in terms of our interest. And so I think they realize that we come from a place of, it may be a tough conversation. We may have to say some things you might want to hear, but at the end of the day, you know, we're coming from a good place and we want to see you succeed. So it's not an issue across our portfolio for the most part.
That's great. That perspective that you are beginning that relationship with as a genuine partnership versus an investment, that completely changes the paradigm. And it, you know, okay, Joe is on my side. He's not across the table from me pointing down, hey, Noble, you need to get your poop in a group. You're coming around the table, putting your arm around me and say, hey, Noble, let's figure this out together. That's a totally different mindset.
No, that's exactly right. Because what you don't want is, you look at a time like now where there's going to be a lot of early stage companies that are going to struggle over the next couple of months in this current environment, right? And so what we don't want is for one of our CEOs to feel like they are isolated and by themselves trying to figure this out and not come to us to have a conversation or come to us for help, right? Because if you come to me when you're out of money and you're like, what do? I have limited options. But if you come to me 6 months out because you trust me and you're like, hey, I don't know if this is going to go in a solid direction, but I'm a little worried, then we have the time to sit down and kind of game plan and figure out a solution and options to give ourselves the best chance of success.
So I love it. So based on, this recent economic and societal, environment that we're currently in really sprung up, you could almost argue out of nowhere, literally, just in the last few months. So how have you, as a VC, as a leader of leaders, as a coach of coaches, as a VC, how are you helping? What principles or thought processes are you using or applying to help these 44 companies not freak out, right? And hey guys, look, obviously, yep, it's tough times, uncertain times, how are you mentally, emotionally, and even systemically coming alongside them to help keep them in the right frame of mind?
The first thing for me is just really taking in information, right? And I'm very fortunate that I have, peers that do what I do, that have been doing it a lot longer than I have, that I talk to, on a regular basis about what's happening and what they're seeing in the market and how they're interacting with their portfolio. The other thing is that, so Ross Perot Jr., who's calls himself my partner, but he is my boss. Let's be clear. He's absolutely my boss. He runs Hillwood, which is a pretty large real estate developer. They're constantly communicating with their employees and staff and taking surveys about how things are going and, figuring out solutions for people that need to work from home. And so I'm able to look at him and his example and his leadership and then think about how can I apply those things within our portfolio. So, some of the things that we're looking at is really just sitting down with our founders on a quick call and assessing, okay, where are you at capital-wise, right? How much cash do you have on the balance sheet? How are you feeling about your customer base? What's the impact? And what do you see as the foreseeable impact in the next 4 to 6 months? How do we navigate that? And so I think part of it is, people have to understand that what you understood your business to be a month ago is no longer the case. That paradigm is completely shifted. I don't care what your business is, that's changed. And so understanding worst case scenarios and having plans that you're able to execute, whether it's, okay, we have to slow down something we're doing on the product development side. Maybe it's less marketing, right? Maybe it's less finding new customers and it's just focusing on servicing our existing customers. Maybe it's thinking about your employee base and how you can be flexible. Maybe at some point you have to cut back some of your unnecessary staff that are in roles that, don't necessarily support the next 6 to 12 months. But just being thoughtful is what we're trying to help some of our entrepreneurs do at this point, so we can hopefully avoid the, 11 o'clock panic call. Things are going under, the ship's going under. At that point, it's really tough to try to figure out solutions.
Joe, I'm loving hearing your thought process, because like everything you're saying it's all based on, and you said this, but even if you didn't say this, one of the things that I always kind of do an assessment of, do the words, do the lyrics and the music match? And your words and music match. Like you're telling me Noble, relationship is important, but you're also living it. Like you're living that relationship with your your other 44 companies and founders and C-level folks and the sales teams and all those things, that they matter to you. And so, I guess, the thing in business is the secret to business is there's no secret. Just the relationship. Here's another great one is, well, in my opinion, business and everything, it all boils down to relationship. There are people that value outcome over relationship. And at some point, that relationship is going to realize, okay, you say you care about me, but you actually care more about my numbers than you actually care about me.
Yeah. I will tell you one thing I haven't really mentioned, and this is one of the things that allows me to do the things that I do within our business and our portfolio, is that, the two partners that created my firm, Anurag Jain and Ross Perot Jr., they're very, very people oriented. So Ross is the kind of person that, I'll take him to a pitch in California to hear a company. And this is a person that's obviously very successful, sold multi-billion-dollar businesses. And he sits down with an early stage entrepreneur and he wants to know, where are you from? Where'd you go to high school? What sports did you play in high school? What do your parents do? What about your siblings? Do you have kids? Where do they go to school? What do they do? Tell me about your spouse. So he understands that getting to know people on that level before even talking about business makes people feel like, okay, this person wants to understand me and understand my motivations and where I come from and just get my story. And so I'm fortunate that I work for two people that believe in those same things, which makes my job easy because now as a VC, I know from my 44 companies, without talking to Ross or Anurag, I just got to do the right thing, right? They make my job really simple. In any given situation, all I have to do is do the right thing. And I know I'm square with my partners. We're good.
That is awesome. And, you said this earlier, it's like all your core values align. The other two, the whole, like, there's alignment, there's authenticity, there's integrity. The spinal column, I call it the business spinal column, is aligned. And when the spinal column is aligned, the whole body operates more effectively.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah, that's great. What is one of the things, maybe one of the most challenging things in your business journey that you personally have faced or experienced, and how did you overcome that? How did you work through it?
I think that, I think I've told you, I've grown up with this, mentality of being faster, smarter, sharper than my peers and the people around me. And that's how my dad kind of raised me. But I will tell you that underdog mentality will only get you so far, in my opinion. I think if you always hold on to that, you're always going to fight to get in the room, right? But you're never going to fight to own the room, right? Because you're always fighting this delicate balance of, I got to be smart enough to get in, but then I got to stay, right? I got to hold on to my seat. And so that means you can't be bold, right? You can't be aggressive. You can't be out front because you're constantly wanting to stay in the fairway, right? And so I think that's something that I've had to learn over time, that it's okay to be bold. It's okay to be visionary. It's okay to go against the grain, right? Sometimes you may be thinking about things that nobody else is thinking about. But if you're constantly saying, you know what, I'm not going to make this point, or I'm not going to bring this up because I'm sure somebody else is thinking it, right? Somebody else is going to make that point. And so then your voice doesn't get heard, right? So that's something through investment banking. I had to really learn that I could bring something to the table, add value. I could lead. I could be up front. And same thing in my role now, right? I work for two very successful people that have done a lot, but they lean on me to help them understand things about the market because they're not out there every day. So they want to hear what I think about the market and where our firm should be going and what things we should be focused on and what deals we should pass on and why, if there's been times where I thought we should invest in something. And we talked about it and they were like, I'm not sure. And I had to push it. I had to say, no, I don't think you guys are thinking about this. You know, let's take a deeper dive. Here's some of the things that I'm seeing. Here's the fundamentals, right? So I think that's something that I've learned over time. And it's something it's still something I'm conscious of to this day.
How do you define failure?
You know, because, and I think this is not to go back to the military, failure for me is really just giving up or not trying, man. Like, I feel like there's times when I haven't gotten the outcome that I've wanted, but I don't necessarily think that was a failure, right? Because I go back and assess, did I make the right decisions for the right reasons? Because sometimes you can't control the outcome, right? Sometimes there's things out there that you just can't foresee that are going to change the outcome, and it may not be in your failure. But even in our portfolio, like I had a company that didn't work out and went under, right? And that happens in every VC, but I'll tell you, for me, I took it personally. I was like, that hurts, right? Because this is a company and an entrepreneur that we assessed, but then it was going back and saying, okay, was there something we missed in our diligence? Was there something that we would have changed or we should have asked? And if we had asked the right questions, we would have gotten a different answer or made different decisions. And when we went back, we were like, you know what? Okay, I think we invested for the right reasons. I think we made the right decisions. Let's not judge ourselves by the outcome. Let's judge ourselves on what we did to get to the outcome. So for me, I just don't see a negative consequence as a failure. It's going back and assessing the process.
That is another trait that I feel so many entrepreneurs have. For me, I view failure as my professor. I view it as a learning tool, not as an event and not as my identity. There was a phase in my entrepreneur journey where I became the failure, which paralyzed me, and I didn't go forward, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it can crush you, right? It can absolutely crush you.
That's right. So can you share maybe one or two defining moments in your, business journey, success journey, life journey, and how did that defining moment impact you?
Yeah, I would say there's been a couple of pivotal points. I would say the first, and this credit goes to John Hampton, K-Rock, for those that know him. My decision to leave Applied Materials in Silicon Valley, where I loved my job. I worked for a former Army captain that was my mentor. My wife was born and raised in Hawaii. We were in California, so couldn't get any closer to Hawaii. Like, life was good. But John was super persistent and getting me to apply to Columbia Business School, and the fact that it was going to change my life. And so the fact that I listened to John, only applied to Columbia, did not apply to any other business school, got into Columbia, packed up my wife and kid, my wife being born and raised in Hawaii, and flew to New York and lived in Washington Heights up on 163rd and Riverside. And that was big. And so a lot of that was just trust, right? I really trusted John's opinion and what he was saying about business school and what he had learned. And the fact that we had that relationship for so long, we're best buddies at West Point. That was pivotal. That was a game changer because, I felt like I was risking everything in terms of my family and moving across the coast. So not making that work was not an option for me, right? That was a big, big investment. I would say the second big jump for me in my career, leaving investment banking and jumping to venture capital, was a big decision for me. Anytime you've been doing something for so long, right? I had done investment banking for 8 years. I've probably done, I don't know, 10 to $15 billion in transactions. So it's something that I understood, right? Like I understood how to advise a CEO, how to look at a transaction, how to value a company, how to think about strategy. Like that was my bread and butter after doing it for 8 years. So to make a jump to running a venture capital firm where essentially I was going to be the only employee, right? There was going to be nobody else. And I had to build it, right? The task was figure out the investment strategy, figure out our competitive advantages, and then go out and execute, right? So, I was excited about the opportunity, but it was a big jump, which meant I had to be uncomfortable, right? And I think that's something that we haven't talked about, on this call is being uncomfortable. You got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, man. Like that's so important. And so that's something for me where, not knowing everything, ambiguity, having, the relationship with Ross and Anurag where they're a little removed from the business and they're really counting on me to make day-to-day decisions. Like I had to be comfortable being uncomfortable for a while. So that was a big jump.
How do you help someone, coach someone, mentor someone to get to a place where they become comfortable with being uncomfortable?
There's two big factors I think that impact every entrepreneur or the decision to become an entrepreneur. Two powerful forces. One is risk and one is fear, right? Those are two powerful things. And so, one of the things I tell every entrepreneur is understanding how to deal with both of those. Fear is not real, right? At the day, as fear is something that comes from emotion, right? So understanding the difference between something that's a real risk and something that you can mitigate and problem solve for versus fear, which is something that's just an emotion, an internal reaction to something. Being able to distinguish between those two things, I think is really important because everybody's not built to be an entrepreneur, right? And so being able to assess the risk in your life and the things that you fear, I think you have to be able to do that up front. And then once you get past that point and you decide that you do want to take a leap into entrepreneurship, one of the things that we do is we just try to eliminate the obstacles, right? We know that every entrepreneur that we invest in, they're going to have obstacles. And that obstacle is going to be different for everybody. For some, it's going to be leadership. Some, it might be sales. Some, it might be software development. It might be fundraising. It might be marketing. What we try to do is understand the entrepreneur enough and the founding team enough that we anticipate what those obstacles are going to be. And the ones that we have the ability to impact, we try to address those.
That is awesome. So, and not to bring everything back around to EQ, but I really think it takes self-awareness to be able to do what you just said. Like you've got to be able to assess, risk, and you've got to be able to assess, your own fear. Where's the emotion coming from, and is it real? Is it not real? What is it based on? All that comes from a place of being self-aware, and just there's so many people, and I was one of them that, man, I was not. I've only kind of stumbled into this whole EQ journey a few years ago. It sounds like you've been emotionally intelligent for quite a while. I'm just new on this journey, but I think that's another important factor in being able to assess those two things.
Hey, my wife might say otherwise, but she was sitting here.
That's great. Okay, so on that, what are some areas that you feel you still need to develop or you still need to grow in?
I would say a couple of different things. One, I think coming from investment banking, it teaches you to be skeptical of everything, right? Trust nothing, not a number, not a page, not a PowerPoint, not what comes out of someone's mouth. Like you're taught to analyze everything. And so over time that can make you a little pessimistic, towards things. And so something that I've constantly taught myself through venture capital is to really kind of erase everything that comes before sitting down with the next entrepreneur to some degree, right? And what I mean by that is that you can't come in and prejudge the person you're sitting across from or prejudge the opportunity, because you'll not listen. You won't actively listen. You'll automatically be ready to speak and ready to say something and ready to shoot a hole in something without really hearing the story. And so that's something that I constantly work on is, making sure that I'm looking at everything with a fresh set of eyes and not allowing an experience that I've previously had to really, really change the way I'm looking at something before I even see it. Right. So that's something that it's something it's hard to do, right? Because you see an opportunity and something that didn't work and you're like, no, before you even start, I've seen this before. I know how this story plays out. Here's what you're about to say. And here's why it doesn't work. And here's why I'm not investing. Right. Like you just can't do that.
Those cognitive biases that we develop, it is so true. Again, not to beat a dead horse, but to beat a dead horse, that takes emotional intelligence for you to develop that skill. Because how many times, oh, well, you're the air defense guy, or, oh, you're the infantry guy, or, oh, you're the West Point guy, or right, whatever the bias is. And like you said, as soon as you bring up that bias, again, so you may be even aware of it, you may even not be aware of it, but now I build all these filters up, and I'm not even listening to what Joe is saying because he's air defense, or he's from Texas, or again, whatever my biases are. And now that relationship is going to be very limited on what you're able to do together.
But I will tell you, the thing that keeps me grounded in that aspect is, going back to thinking about my journey and the fact that I've had so many people help me throughout my career. And sometimes it's that one meeting, that one interaction, that one kind of voice in your ear at the right time when you needed it can be a game changer, right? And so I try to listen to every pitch. Like there's days where, we might have a calendar with 7 or 8 pitches in a day. Like literally every half an hour, someone's in the office or on the phone pitching us on a new idea. And the reason we do that is because we literally want to try to give everybody their shot, right? Because I know they've worked hard. I know it's something they're trying to do for their family, for their friends, for their employees. I know they're trying to change the world, right? So we try to take as many meetings as we can, which is difficult, right? Because at the end of the day, it's time and money, right? They're 2 things that we kind of balance and play with. And so time is super valuable, but, trying to really sit down and understand that, hey, this next 30 minutes or 45 minutes might be game changing for the person that's sitting across from me. So it's worth paying attention and listening to what they have to say.
Excellent advice and point there, Joe. What aspect of your role gives you the most joy?
For me, it's just, I'd say the biggest thing is being a part of somebody else's journey, right? Like that's the part that's so much fun. Like getting in the car with them and driving down the road and hitting bumps and navigating and getting lost together and figuring out which direction to go, figuring out who to pick up along the way, right? Like that, being a part of that journey, I think is the most powerful thing for me because at the end of the day, I think we've all been blessed with different opportunities. And I still to this day do not feel like I've given back as much as I've received, right? Like the fact that I was able to have 2 great parents in my house, guiding me, pushing me. I was able to go to West Point. I was able to be in the military. I was able to go to Columbia and get my MBA. I was able to work in investment banking with really smart people and make good money to support my family. I have not done enough to deserve all of that I've been given. So I think at this point for me, to be able to impact somebody else's journey, to be able to change their life, the life, for their kids, their family, their parents, their employees, their friends. Like, to be able to play a role in that and have a positive impact on somebody else's journey, that's the joy. That's the fun of it all.
Again, such a testimony to who you are as a man, as a leader, Joe. Just again, your heart is coming through. I mean, that is so awesome. Again, not a surprise why you're as successful as you are when that is the thing that brings you the greatest joy. In my opinion, that is awesome. So you mentioned something that I want to ask you about, and then there'll be one more question. Where does family fit into your headspace? You know, yeah, where does it fit in? How do you balance family? What does family mean to you? That kind of thing.
Well, first of all, family's everything, right? Like, that's kind of how I was raised. That's how my dad is. That's how my brother is, my sister, my mom. Like, family's everything. I'll tell you, for me, like, I've never had balance. I don't think balance exists when you're talking about work life and family life. If you're really out there trying to be successful, there's not balance. But what I tell you that I do focus on is making sure that my family sees that there's balance. I know there's not balance, but making them feel like there's balance, that's the key. And so, what that means is, it's quality touches, right? It's quality over quantity. It's understanding the things that are important to the people around you and making sure you're there, and you're there when it matters, and you're filling that need, so that for them, it doesn't look like dad's always working or their spouse is always working. They're like, man, how does dad make it to lacrosse practice? How does dad make it to my school play? But it's understanding what the important things are and making sure that those quality touches happen. The other thing for me is making sure that I bring my family into work, right? So when I go to South by Southwest for 4 or 5 days, which didn't happen this year, but when I typically go for 4 or 5 days, my kids come down and they stay in the hotel and they come hear me speak. And my wife goes to events with me. And so I keep them engaged in what I do professionally so that they understand it. And so when I'm gone, they know why I'm gone. My son's like, hey, Dad, did you have big meetings today or little meetings? If it's a big meeting, he's like, oh, I couldn't have gone to work with you because it was a big meeting. If it was a little meeting, he's like, oh, maybe I could go to work with Dad if it's little meetings, right? So just understanding how to keep them engaged in what I do is really important. I'll tell you another funny tidbit. When I was in investment banking, I had a couple of analysts that worked for me, and these were guys that were kind of 1 or 2 years out of college. A lot of them were either engaged, serious girlfriend, or had just gotten married. And so there was a flower shop in our building, right? And so this woman sold roses. Every Friday in the lobby, you could buy roses. And it was literally like 2 dozen roses for like $25, right? I literally used to buy roses for my wife like every week. And so the guys in the office are like, dude, what in the hell? Like, you're killing me. Like, why in the hell would you buy roses? It's not Valentine's Day. It's not birthday. Like, why are you buying flowers? And I'm like, what you don't understand about marriage, and you will, is at some point, you're either going to mess up, or you're going to have to do some things that just aren't going to sit well with your spouse that you got to do professionally. And all I'm doing right now is building equity, right? And so, it's funny. I talk to those guys now, and they're like, okay, now I get it. I get it. You're absolutely right. Now I see why you were buying those flowers, right? So it's just staying in tune with the fam is important, man. Like, I don't compromise that for anything. So every move that I've made in my career, my family has been pivotal in those moves. Absolutely pivotal.
If I were to ask your wife right now what she appreciates the most about you, what would she say?
I think she would say, and this is probably a good and a bad trait in some degree, she would say, I always put myself out there to help just about anybody I can that's in my circle, right? Whether I just met you, whether we've been friends for 20 years, I always feel like if there's something I can do and something I have the ability to do to change your life, who am I not to do that? And so I think my wife would say that's a great characteristic in a sense that no matter what, I always try to help my family, my friends, strangers. There's times where I'm up at 3 o'clock in the morning, working on somebody's financial model. Why? Because I can build it better than they can. And so I do those things. The downside of that is I bend over backwards to do those things, right? And so, sometimes I can definitely have my plate be a little bit too full. And there's times where I don't have enough time for myself, probably. And my wife will keep me honest and, get on me when those things happen. But I always try to go out of my way to help people, man, because I just feel like the good you put out in the world will come back to you threefold. And so if you have the ability to help somebody or change somebody's life, you can't be selfish, right?
Love it. What do you appreciate the most about your wife?
Man, she is super understanding. Holy smoke. She's like home team, like absolutely home team. I mean, we have 4 kids, right? And we definitely would not have 4 kids if she wasn't a hustler when it comes to, soccer practice, lacrosse practice, modeling gigs, getting people to doctor appointments and dentist appointments, managing my schedule, making sure I'm making those events that are important and that are right, the things that I need to be at, making sure I'm prioritizing those things. Like if she's down, the whole thing unfolds, man. You know what I mean? So I appreciate for her. She's just home team and rolls up her sleeves, and she doesn't go to work every day in a job that pays her money, but she grinds just as hard as I do.
That's neat. It just seems like you guys have a really neat relationship and a neat family dynamic that you guys have created together. What do you feel, what's your purpose in life?
That's a good question, man. It's something I think about all the time. I'm constantly questioning if I am devoting my skills and my work towards the things that are my best and highest use. Um, I don't know. I think at this point, I see my purpose, and I think it's always been the same, right? I feel like I have found success by helping other people to be successful, right? By helping other people with their purpose and lending my skill sets to be helpful to others, I found success for myself. I don't know what that means, right? We'll see where that takes me over the next 10 years. But I don't know. I feel like I'm just, like I said, my knack is really understanding people and really taking the time to understand people's needs and their wants and their goals and what they're trying to accomplish, and listening to others. And by helping other people, kind of solve some of those challenges, I've managed somehow to find success for myself.
Again, not a surprise, man, why you're so successful. That's awesome. And now this one is going to be kind of a little bit of a dovetail from this last question. What questions do you think about? What questions do you ponder? One you said is, man, what is my highest and best use? What is my purpose in life? Are there any other questions that you find yourself thinking about, chewing on throughout the week, throughout the month, throughout the year?
I think one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about is, just doing right by my loved ones, right? Because, when you're focused on grinding and you're constantly working, and for me, that's, interacting and managing up with, Ross Perot Jr. and Anurag Jain, making sure they get what they need from me. It's actively managing our portfolio. It's interacting with my partner, Cindy Raval, and making sure she's developing and get what she needs in terms of being a better venture capitalist. And all of that noise, sometimes I'm like, man, am I giving my son Tyson what he needs? Is Charlie, my 11-year-old, is she getting what she needs? Is my wife getting what she needs? So I'm constantly every day assessing how I spend my time, who I spend my time with and whether I'm allocating things the right way. That's just a constant for me. And you can't always get it right, but that's something that I fight hard to try to get as right as possible, because the worst thing for me is going to bed at night and feeling like, man, I missed it. I didn't get it right. Right. I should have spent time on this and I didn't. And damn, I regret that. Like, I don't like that. So for me, I fight really hard to make sure I'm doing that.
Any final thoughts, encouragement, tips, advice that you would share with the listeners on business, entrepreneurship, success, failure, overcoming adversity, any of that stuff? Any final thoughts? And I've got a couple more questions after that.
One thing I would say, and this is based on where we are in the world today, right? With, this coronavirus and the impact it's having on so many people's lives. There's times where you have to, not think about the next dollar of revenue, not focus on getting the next product or service out there. You gotta narrow it down and focus on people, right? And I think this is one of those times where, you have to be, if you're a leader of an organization, I know you're trying to keep the lights on. I know you're focused on revenue, and you got to do those things. But it goes back to, I don't know if you remember this from the military, mission first, people always, right? Like, for anybody that's ever been in the service, like, it's that, right? It's that right now that I think people have to be focused on. It's people always. And so you've got to be taking the time to check in on your employees, your friends, your parents, your siblings, your kids, right? Like, there's people out there that are struggling, that are going to have a really, really difficult time, and their situation is going to be worse than your situation. And so I would say that now is just a great time that if you need to check in on people, if there's people in your life that you're concerned about, help somebody, right? Grind and make sure your stuff is straight, but spend the time to really check in on somebody, because we all got to live to fight another day, right? And so I just think it's an important time to do that. The business is going to be there, and I get it. You're going to have to spend some late nights, and you're going to have to work hard, and you're going to have to sacrifice some things right now, but check in on the people around you. It'll serve you, and it'll serve them, and it'll serve your team a lot better later on.
Excellent advice, Joe. What resources have been instrumental in your growth journey, business-wise, personal growth-wise, whether it's books, podcasts, specific leaders, that kind of thing? Are there some specific actionable tools or resources that you can share with us that have been helpful for you?
For me, to be honest with you, I don't read a ton. I wish I did. If I turn my video around right now, you'd see a library of books sitting in my office. But I literally don't find a lot of time to read. I do look at a lot of different folks on Twitter, and a lot of people that I follow on LinkedIn that I think just put out, interesting content. And it's not just an individual. It's just, a lot of times it's peers. It could be someone like you, right? That, just has something interesting to say about something I want to learn about. For me, where I get most of my learning is just personal interaction, is what it boils down to. Sitting down with, a CEO of a Fortune 500 company for 30 minutes and just understanding what it is that they stress about is helpful to me, right? And how they manage that stress is important. What I told you about Joe DePinto and the right people on the bus, that was a conversation over lunch, where he kind of shared, like, that's what he focuses on. And he's like, that's a big part of my role, is just getting the right person in the right role. And if you do that, it's magic. And so that's, hearing that and getting those kind of personal interactions and takeaways from people is probably where I get most of my learning. And fortunately or unfortunately, those learnings don't always come in a positive way, right? Like, a lot of times it can be a negative interaction, right? I mean, I saw some things in investment banking, man, that investment bankers are not paid to be leaders, right? Like investment bankers aren't paid $10 million a year because they're a great leader. That's just not why they're paid. They're paid because they're smart and they can execute and build relationships and close transactions. That's it at the end of the day. So, in investment banking, you see a lot of poor examples of leadership. You see it a lot. And that's because a lot of those people never had to grow up managing a team. They manage their client and they manage a deal and they manage a process. Everything else, people are tools that they bring as they need to utilize those tools to get deals done. So for me, it's the personal interaction. That's really how I learn. When I go speak on stages, whether it's like South by or a pitch competition or something like that, the questions that people ask and the things that people care about, that's part of my learning, right? Every pitch that I hear is part of my learning. I'm learning something about people and how to interact. I'm learning something about a new industry, a new business, a new model, a new framework. So for me, it's those interactions that I really kind of, draw from. That's where I get my learning.
That's awesome. It's almost like every interaction is almost like a book, right? It's almost like a podcast.
It is.
Right?
It is. It's always something new and it's something different and it's a different perspective. And you just take away something from that. Like I said, it might be good, it might be bad, but either way, it's something that's going to change the way that I think going forward after that interaction.
That's excellent. Joe, absolutely cannot thank you enough. I'm super bummed that I have not been more intentional at building a relationship with you because I have missed out, man. You have so much. Hopefully I'll change that going forward because, and I'm thankful though. So better late than never. I'm thankful that God crossed our paths again because you have just shared a gold mine of wisdom and insight and your heart with us. And I super duper appreciate that, Joe.
It's funny. My wife asked me when I told her about this, because originally I was supposed to be at South by Southwest this week. So I was literally going to be coming right back from South by and doing this podcast. And my wife was like, is it important to you? Like, how do you know this guy? And I'm like, man, Noble was that guy at West Point that was always just super solid character, just a stand-up great dude, God-fearing great dude, and that's how I always remembered you. So when you hit me about doing this, I was like, oh, I gotta do this, gotta do it.
Man, Joe, that's humbling, man. Thanks a million. I totally appreciate that, brother. Thanks a million. Joe, how do we find you? How do we follow you? For the folks who are going to be listening and stuff, how do we get more genuine Joe in our life?
So LinkedIn, just look up Joe Beard, Dallas or Perot, and you'll find me. On Twitter and Instagram, Joe Beard 214. Handles the same on both. I try to interact with everybody that I can. So if you reach out to me through any of my social media, I'll try to ping you back. It's not always super easy, but I'll try to make it happen.
When's the Joe Beard book coming out on success and life and leadership?
As soon as I figure it out, my friend. I promise you, as soon as I figure it out, I'm gonna be on it.
Awesome. Joe, thank you so much. Please thank your wife for letting us have some of your time, and excited to develop our relationship, man. Totally appreciate you, brother.
All right. I appreciate you. Thanks a lot, man.
Okay. God bless. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care.